Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Wednesday, April 13th. This is the regular meeting of the City of Los Angeles City Council's Homelessness and Poverty Committee. I am your chair for today, Marquise Harris Dawson. I'm joined by our Vice Chair, Councilmember Jose Huizar, and Member Mike Bonin. We're calling the meeting to order. We will, Mr. Clerk, begin the meeting with general public comment, for which I have a few cards. So if you haven't gotten your general public comment card in now.
Yes, sir. We have a couple more general
Okay,
public
let's get those. You're going to miss out. So we're starting with Beth Mueller, Eric Ades, Linda Dunstan Kelly, Christine Miraciglasco. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My comments relate to the ballot initiative to fund the construction of more permanent supportive housing. And I speak in favor of the measure and in favor of the council placing it on the November ballot. My name is Beth Mueller. I'm a candidate for ordination as a deacon in the United Methodist Church. I serve with the 6 downtown United Methodist churches and with leadership in the Episcopal Church. I have been actively involved in Skid Row since October of 2009. I teach a Bible study at the church on the corner of 6th and San Pedro, and that's in the Church of the Nazarene. For years, I have been trusted with the stories of people who struggle with a variety of challenges. The details vary, but safe, affordable, healthy housing is always a key element to their wholeness. It's a privilege to be trusted with the truths they wish to share with me. It is a sacred trust. And as so many others do, I listen, I care, I try to connect them to the limited resources that are available, and I pray. But I want an opportunity to do more.
Thank you.
Please support the ballot initiative on the November ballot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Eric Ades. I'm with the Los Angeles Community Action Network. Just a couple of notes related to the efforts to fund the plan fully. I think that, as we've stated, as a lot of community members have stated, we think that as much money and funding that can go to permanent supportive housing, the better. We think all of it should. I think that we are encouraged, and I know there's action on this already on the city level, but we're encouraged by Councilmember Bonin's efforts to turn the senior center on Warminster and Westminster and Pacific into storage and identifying other underutilized properties that we can access immediately to help folks get their property voluntarily off the streets. For example, the storage unit in Skid Row is completely saturated. There are no spots available for folks. Every day people have to show up and line up to get one of those bins. And I think as we start moving into 5611 implementation, it's only fair that we start trying to immediately identify resources that are already on the books, expedite anything we can do to identify and mobilize on those, and get folks property stored in places so that they can properly adhere to the new laws. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Linda Dunstan Kelly of Fathers and Mothers Who Care. We're located at 10975. We're part of the Southeast Empowerment Neighborhood Council and SPA 6. We are in the fight against homelessness and poverty. We ask that you dedicate funds to this cause. We cannot end homelessness or poverty without the dedicated funds. And in this, you will all help us in this council meeting, help us do that.
Thank you. I have after you Mr. Herman and Mr. Wayne.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Christine Miraciglasco. I'm the executive director of Upward Bound House, and I'm here this afternoon, first of all, to commend you for the good work you're doing in addressing the crisis we have of homelessness in the city, in the county of Los Angeles. And I would like to encourage you to continue urging you to dedicate funds to this effort so that we are not only looking at funds that will take us through this coming fiscal year, but to dedicate funds through a ballot initiative. And I would really like to urge you to make that a November initiative versus a spring initiative. So with your help and with your partnership, we hope we can address the problem and reduce the plight of homeless families and individuals in the city and the county of Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
April 12th, item number 15, regarding case 120551, regarding a litigation against the City of Los Angeles of compliance matters for housing relating to the CRA of LA, Community Development Agency, that stole from us, the public, denying us access to housing. Not fucking bullshit shelters. We want a home. Individual homes. So this investigation went through the Department of Justice for connection with Fair Housing Act under ADA and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And in retaliation and relation to negotiations regarding this voluntary compliance agreement, fuck you, CRA, because the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, you've destroyed our housing. And now you're being investigated by Obama, Washington. Fuck you.
I don't see Mr. Wayne, so that'll close public comment. Folks who are new to the City Hall experience, you should know that our ability to constrain and direct the speech of individuals is limited by the First Amendment and subsequent case law, so that we have to allow speech that is often offensive, off-point, racist, and in the category of hate speech. So that should be duly noted by everybody here. Mr. Clerk, can you read item number 1 into the record?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Item number 1 is the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority report relative to the reallocation of funds from transitional shelters to other shelters. It was scheduled pursuant to Council action of February 9, 2016.
Thank you so much. So in this matter, we have a report from LASA. So, Mr. Lynn, if you could come up and give us your take.
Good afternoon, Chairman Harris Dawson and committee. Peter Lynn, I'm the Executive Director for the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. We're responsible for submitting the annual application for funds for homeless assistance through HUD's Continuum of Care Notice of Funding Availability. Last year's NOFA required us to take an extremely aggressive approach, shifting funds from older program models like transitional housing and supportive service only grants to permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing in order to make the most competitive NOFA. We had a number of competitive disadvantages in this cycle, so we needed to reallocate, which gave us a points advantage, as well as making those grants eligible to stay in Los Angeles. HUD put about 15% of our overall portfolio, which for LA is about $14 million, at risk of competition from other continua instead of being just renewed in Los Angeles. So rather than risk losing the money, we reallocated from less competitive grant structures where we would likely have lost the money and put it into grant structures where we knew we would win the money. That required us to shift funding from transitional housing and supportive service only grants. There were 58 grants impacted. Most of those were transitional housing grants. The majority of them were in these single adults, some households with children, very few that focused on domestic violence, and there was one that focused on transition age youth. The rest of them were supportive service only grants. So those usually offered case management for other kinds of contracts. Some of them provided access centers. We've been working with that portfolio of reallocated grants to find alternative funding sources and alternative programming for those for that portfolio, particularly focused on those that are expiring before the end of this fiscal year, so that we can at least bridge them into a new funding year where there's the potential for new crisis housing funding that might combine these programs into what's much more like crisis housing for our family system, crisis housing for our single adult system, the coordinated entry system. We've been working with those grant structures. Fortunately, they expire in sort of a few at a time over the months, so it's not that they all ended at December or they all ended in a particular month. There are roughly a quarter of them ending each quarter. There are 12 of them that are expiring in this first quarter, and we've worked out funding arrangements for 5 of those, and we're working out, putting those, and so those are, crisis housing that could be serving families or single adults. Most of these are families. We have, there are 3 of them that are sort of in a decision-making process with regard to whether they want to accept those, and there are 4 that have articulated to us that they have alternative funding sources to cover them through the end of this fiscal year. We're working with about 18 programs that are expiring in the second quarter. That's from now to June to, essentially detail out additional sources of funding, whether that's through crisis housing programs that we have current access to, or whether we have our, sort of allied other public agencies. There are a number of different public agencies with the county and with the federal government that use crisis housing for their populations. That includes the Department of Mental Health and the County Department of Health Services, which have a number of homeless clients and that use crisis housing and recuperative housing beds for their population. So we have shared this portfolio with those agencies, and they're working with those providers as well. There are some that are working that's currently serve a veterans population. They're working with the VA to bridge on a crisis housing bed. Some of them have capacity within their own private fundraising, and they've indicated that they can bridge it that way. So it's a wide variety of different kinds of programming needs. It's a wide variety of different kinds of interests. There's only one program that we're aware of that's currently ceased operations, and they have done that on a internal decision-making process to figure out what they next want to do. So they've essentially stopped taking new clients in order to. This is on the west side. It's in Hollywood. It's the YWCA or YMCA. And they're in a process of sort of reviewing what they want to do. It's not that they want to get out of this business. They want to kind of we're talking to them, so we're figuring out what we want to do with that portfolio. But it's our intention to ensure that we don't lose this portfolio, but we repurpose it as crisis housing. It was part of the ask that we made to both the city and the county in our budget requests to find funding for crisis beds that could be linked to either our single adult system or a family system or a youth system, and continue to hold this portfolio within what we can fund. Our partner agencies, though, also buy beds, and there's a number of different ones that are looking at that. I think that's sort of an overall summary of where we are. I'm happy to entertain questions.
Thank you so much. Members, questions, comments for Mr. Lynn? Councilman Price?
Thanks for the report. I'm still just kind of not clear. I know you said that we're trying to reallocate, and so is it that 5, we're trying to salvage basically 5 programs of this 58 that we're trying to salvage for ongoing funding, or just some transitional funding, or what's the...
So one of the sources, within our homeless family solution system, we've got a rapid rehousing program with some funding for crisis housing for families. So families typically use motel vouchers, and so what we're working with the providers is to essentially convert what would have been a motel voucher kind of situation to these sites and use that same funding source as, instead of a motel, it would be, a bed in these sites. I think it's a win-win. It's more cost-effective. It's also, consistent with the current funding profile that we're looking at. So those are the kinds of arrangements that we're working on.
Mm-hmm. And then what did you say about the Transitional Age Youth situation, the TAY situation?
So there was one program that focused on Transition Age Youth. It is in the latter half of the year, and there were 6 beds. I confess that I do not know the status. Paul, we can get back to you on that one. Okay.
Can you come to the microphone and identify yourself?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to note that Mr. Herman is continuing to bleat like a sheep. It is disrupting the meeting, and I think should be removed.
Thank you. This is your warning, Mr. Herman, so you'll knock it off. And perhaps, Mr. Lynn, you can come sit here, because I think we're going to be at it for a while. Yeah, we're going to be at it with you for a while.
I'm happy to stand. If that's
okay.
With the sheep aside. Paul Duncan is the Associate Director for Systems, and the single family, the single adult and families and youth systems at LASA are under his management.
Just curious, this is a real need. I know it's always,
Yes.
these beds are always in short supply.
Well, so this is one of
this
the areas
population.
where certainly within funding that's been identified in the county, there is a funding source for both crisis housing and for rapid rehousing for youth. So this is an area where I'm not, I don't think that there's going to be a problem matching them up. It's a question of sort of discussion and figuring out what they want to do. So obviously all of these providers have programs. They have things that they've been doing for quite a while. And so a lot of it is a discussion with them about this changed environment and what they want to do. And some of them are articulating that they may want to do other things, and that's where there's an ongoing discussion with them. It is not up to us to tell them. It's a discussion and a negotiation.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we're having this discussion.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Bonin?
Thank you, and thanks for the work you're doing on this, Peter. I'm not at all critical of LASA, but man, I'm very critical of HUD. I understand there's a logic to what they're doing with these funding formulas, but I think it's bloodless and callous, and I think it's causing significant pain, and I think it's irresponsible, and I think the secretary to come here and promise that he's going to be helping us and do this at the same time is hypocritical. And I think it has put LASA in a very difficult situation where you've had to make some of these choices.
I won't argue with that.
I'm curious. I know you've been working very hard with different agencies to try to repurpose funds, to try to save stuff. Do we know how many beds have been lost?
Well, when you say lost, I mean, like I said, there's one program that has told us, okay, we're gonna close our doors for now, but we'll come back when we've sort of made a decision. That's the only one, and it's not clear that the beds are lost. So at this point, we haven't lost.
If they were there 2 months ago and they're not there now, right now they're lost, as far as I'm concerned.
So I think from that, I don't have that number, but I can certainly get it to you.
Okay. How many? I mean, I know I was looking through the reports of your talks for
Yes.
the organizations in my district, and I mean, there's potential, but a lot of it might not bear out. What kind of potential loss are we looking at if some of this stuff doesn't pan out?
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, there were about 2,000 beds in the whole portfolio. It looks to me, it's very unclear what the funding picture is for this kind of, this kind of infrastructure. I really can't say right now.
So,
when the budgets are solidified, we have a much better picture of what the potential would look like. Also, as I said, these are ongoing discussions, and there are alternative funders for some of these beds. So, and there are potential new funding opportunities like the managed Medi-Cal providers. We're in discussions with them as well. They need to get into this game as well and start purchasing recuperative care beds. We're talking with them about that.
Mr. Price was asking, you and Mr. Price were talking about the motel vouchers, and you said they were being converted to something else. I couldn't quite understand what that money would be converted to.
So what we're looking at is a situation where there have been transitional housing programs for families with children, and there's a crisis housing system for families that enter our homeless family solution system, and currently we use motel vouchers. The majority of crisis housing for the families is in the form of motel vouchers, which is a relatively expensive way to provide crisis housing. Our hope is to create contracts between what was a HUD-funded transitional housing portfolio for families with children to turn it into crisis housing that's the site-based crisis housing for the family system, so that those, rather than going to motels, they're going into these sites, and that then they're flowing through into rapid rehousing outcomes. That's
Okay,
the intent is to hammer it into more of a system rather than individual programs.
So it's not in lieu of rapid rehousing, it's just a step
That's
before
correct.
rapid rehousing.
That's correct. So, obviously, it's not ideal for anybody to be on the street and trying to get housed, but for families with children, we really just don't, that's not an acceptable situation. None of it is acceptable, but we have put together a funding source through the TANF money that we have to put, families with children into shelter right away, and that shelter typically is a motel.
Okay. There's a number of the agencies in my district that run out of funds in June or July. A home for female veterans in Mar Vista that has 8 beds.
New Directions. Is it
Another New Directions program with 116 beds. When will we get an update on these programs that have a looming deadline for losing their funding?
So we have a number of different discussions that are going on in the next couple of weeks. So I think probably for 3 weeks we would have a good picture of what I'm happy to provide ongoing updates on this. This is not an area that we want to be silent on. We'd like to keep updating the committee on this.
And what potential funding, I understand that we're looking to see what funding there'll be in the mayor's proposed budget. What did we get out of the county budget that just got approved the other day? Are there funds in there that may help fill some of these gaps?
So under a number of different strategies, there are funding sources that may be applicable. So there's a set of funds that have been identified for people experiencing homelessness who are at risk of homelessness on discharge from institutions. So the majority of that funding is associated with criminal justice, discharge. SB 678 and AB 109 funds are the majority of that funding. So we're talking to folks about potentially converting to serving those populations. There is also some funding from the Homeless Prevention Initiative that would be focused on former foster youth, so that would be more of a transition age youth population. Those are clear funding sources. There's a component of the rapid rehousing for single adults that may serve in the same crisis housing capacity that we've been discussing for families. There's also rapid rehousing for families and for youth. All of those funding sources may well serve have a need for crisis housing for the people who are in process to a rapid rehousing outcome. So there are a number of different funding areas within the county budget that will serve this purpose. It's a question of sort of marrying these programs up with those funding sources.
So we could get through the city budget, through the county budget, ways to fund the number of beds so that we don't have a net loss of beds, but we may actually have a net loss of beds that service certain populations, right?
Well, there is a shift from what has been a transitional housing model to other models. And, that's a shift that HUD has been encouraging us to take on for a long period of time. I think it will improve the turnover in those, and it certainly will improve the cost effectiveness of this program.
I get that, and I understand the rationale behind it. Yep. What I'm curious about, and maybe we don't know yet, and so maybe this is a report back, is by shifting mode from transitional to other forms, are we inadvertently creating losers of certain types of population? Does it create a greater impact, a negative impact on serving families or serving children? Or does it turn out to be a net benefit for that population? I'm curious if we can figure out who is losing out on this, so we can think not just in terms of the agency but the population.
I appreciate the thinking behind the question. I think the overall answer is it should result in more beds, because the turnover in the crisis housing beds is much more rapid than in a transitional model. So essentially, if you turn the bed over every 90 days as opposed to every 6 months, that's like twice as many beds. So in the end, it should result in better throughput and essentially expanded capacity in the beds. But obviously, we got to get there. So there's a piece of analysis in what you're asking, and I'll work on that.
Yeah, I think it's a two-part analysis I'm asking for. One is, are we helping more veterans and fewer kids, or whatever? I mean, substitute different populations into that. But that's sort of the analysis I'm looking for, is anybody winning and is anybody losing as a result of this? The other thing, I get that you say we may be providing more beds because there's a shorter turnaround, but at the end of those 90 days, are we just turning someone back out to the street that otherwise would have spent their fourth month in transitional housing? I think we need to know that as well.
I understand. Okay, so that's a good point. So obviously, as we're working of putting crisis or bridge beds into an overall system, the flow is toward a permanent housing outcome. So on the family system, you're in crisis housing while you're getting into a rapid rehousing permanent housing outcome. It's not a shelter as shelter, come and go as you please kind of a situation. It's very intentional. It's very directional towards permanent housing. Now, that also is the requirement under transitional housing, but it's a longer process, and that's where we may experience actually a gain in beds if we can make the system as efficient as the potential seems to suggest.
And what I want to look out for, and part of the analysis I'm looking for, is whether or not having a shorter process actually works for the human experience.
Yes.
Or if we've created a better model that is just turning more people out on the street.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bond and Mr. Huizar. Nothing. So following up on the questions that Mr. Bonin put forward about loss of beds, I'm trying to get a clearer picture of what our expectations should be. So let me put the same question or a similar question to you in a different way. Is there a category of beds that you think there should be more concern about than others? So families, domestic violence, single men, so on and so forth.
So I don't think so. I mean, I think that the largest category that was impacted were single adult programs, and that's generally our highest. That's our biggest population anyway. It's overwhelming. I feel like the trajectory for the programs that served households with children is pretty good. I think there's a pretty good overlap between the number of beds we're going to need and that we've been funding and the number that's in this portfolio. And I think it's not as easy as just, putting them together like puzzle pieces, but more or less that's sort of where we are. I think that single adult, ensuring that there's enough funding for the single adult programs, I think that would be the area of concern overall.
Children, okay. And then of the sort of best case scenarios for projects that have had their funding cuts, can you talk about a couple that jump out at you?
Well, so we have individuals where, we've talked to them and they've been using a fairly old school transitional housing model. These are longer term programs, and their bed rate is less than, for example, our 24-hour crisis bed rate. So, if we could do, it seems like you could do win-win by increasing their programming, increasing their throughput, and connecting people to much more rapid permanent housing placements, and that that the program actually can enrich their programming from where they were. That's the best case scenario, is where we can really ensure that. One of the challenges that we've had in Los Angeles is that many of the programs were put together in very much isolation from each other. There was not an overall architecture of systemic components snapping into a larger a larger process. Each of these programs was required to have its own standalone intake, its own standalone outcomes. They were not connected to any other infrastructure. I feel like if we can do what we're intending to do and turn these into an interim step toward a permanent housing placement where we've got the funding through these other programs, whether they're these repurposed HUD program dollars or they're the new city and county rapid rehousing programs or other programs that we can access, it is really win-win because we can transition this into a systemic piece of a component of an infrastructure rather than individual standalone programs, which has been the hallmark of LA's homeless assistance programs.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, are there cards on this item?
There's one speaker card, sir.
One? Okay. And is it the one I'm looking at? Mr. Herman.
So the arrogance of this gentleman coming in here with no numbers to truly identify the real problem that has to do with veterans, women, children, and single men. But yet your application of funding doesn't determine that there's enough housing, let alone enough bedding to accompany someone for a lengthy, long time if they are out on the street being homeless. A net loss of bullshit. That's what it is. Transitional bullshit created by transitional housing. So get your shit together, City of Los Angeles. Come up with the real plan and fix the problem you created, gentrification through the so-called process of Viva Broadway, Weezer. And by the way, does your bullshit, what do you call those, waivers, waffles, bullshit you give out? I need one for my comfort pet so I can put my pet into a motel.
Thank you so much. So whereas this matter is still in flux and more will be revealed in the coming months, particularly in the new fiscal year, the recommendation is that we continue this matter and come back to it as we have more information. Can we read number 2 into the record?
Okay, sir, the item will be continued.
Yes, thank you.
Would you
Can we read
to
item number 2 into the record?
Item number 2 is a motion by Council Members Cedillo, Harris Dawson, Bonin, Wizar, and Rue relative to the Permanent Supportive Housing Program and the creation of an accelerated PSH pipeline that entitles project to expedited processing.
Excellent. So we have a number of speaker cards on this matter, so I'm going to go to speaker cards first. The hopes that the comments from speakers perhaps will inform some of the reporting that we get back. So we'll begin with Tommy Newman, Jerry Jones, and Eric Ades.
Good afternoon, council members. Tommy Newman, LA Family Housing. Just calling here on behalf of Stephanie, who really wanted to be here, and everybody at LA Family Housing to say how strongly we support this concept that's before you today. We design projects intentionally to avoid CEQA issues that get raised, so we limit what we could be building because of the challenges that CEQA presents. We all know that. The other item that I would encourage you to think about in this context is site plan review, because we also design our projects to avoid site plan review. So we limit the number of units we could be building because we don't want to have to deal with that threshold and all the challenges that come along with it. And so we'd encourage you to think about that as well in the context of this.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jerry Jones with the Inner City Law Center, and I wanted to speak in support of a new permanent supportive housing program and the creation of an accelerated PSH pipeline. Supportive housing, as it's been evaluated by academics, by practitioners, HUD, USICH, we know that this is the most effective response we have created for long-term homeless folks with disabilities. And so we need a lot more of it. It's not the full solution to LA's homeless crisis, but it is an essential component of that comprehensive response. And without this, many more people will continue to stay out of doors. So I commend you for putting this motion on the committee agenda and urge your support, and we'd be happy to help as this goes through the rest of the council.
Thank you.
Afternoon again. My name is Eric Adams with the Los Angeles Community Action Network. Just commenting in strong support of this. As we continue to create the political will to get the plan fully funded, as we try to get as much of it into PSH as possible, we just want to make sure and support the idea of getting that pipeline in. I know it's a challenge, and we're working with other offices. I think all of you have spoken in favor of PSH, which is now the prevailing model. It wasn't that 10 years ago, but as we start moving in that direction, very strongly support the idea of we'll do our end to try to create the political will, the mayor's office and other committees, but really agree that anything we can do that requires less political will to try to get those buildings in the pipeline to get shoveled in the ground as soon as possible. I'm hopeful that everyone should be in favor of that if we're going to end this crisis. Thank you.
Ann Sewell, Daisy Miguel, Darcy Neva.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Ann Sewell from the California Community Foundation. Speaking in support of this motion and gratitude for your leadership on this. 6 months ago, a number of us who build permanent supportive housing, fund the groups that do, got together to ask what it would take to move the city from 300 to 1,000 units every year of permanent supportive housing, and one of the key issues that was identified was streamlining the process. Some of the cities that our members work in around Los Angeles County can do it in 6 months. We're doing it in 2.5 years. If we could reduce that time period, we could save $330,000 per project, which would make our hard-won money stretch even further. So we really appreciate the effort that went into this and ask for your support. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Harris Dawson and members of the committee. My name is Daisy Miguel, and I'm a project manager with the Community of Friends. Community of Friends is a nonprofit supportive housing developer. We're based here in Los Angeles. Our mission is to end homelessness through the provision of permanent supportive housing for people who are homeless and living with mental illness. We own and operate 40 buildings throughout Los Angeles and Orange County. 32 of our 40 buildings are based here in the city of LA. Most of our buildings are based in 10 out of the 15 city council districts. A Community of Friends serves more than 2,500 people, including formerly homeless individuals, families with children, elderly, transition-aged youth, and veterans, many who have experienced substance abuse, trauma, or are living with a mental illness. Permanent supportive housing provides case management and supportive services, which allows people to stabilize and thrive, thus ending the cycle of poverty and homelessness many of these people face. We currently have 3 projects under construction in the city of LA. These projects will produce 130 units of permanent supportive housing. We strongly urge you to support the motion before you to create a new permanent supportive housing program and an accelerated pipeline.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great project on West Boulevard.
Good afternoon. My name is Darcy Niva. I'm the director of the West Side Coalition in SPA 5, along with Tommy Newman in SPA 4 or SPA 2 and SPA 6. SPA 5 now also adds the resolution in support of a ballot initiative to secure dedicated funding. The lack of sufficient funding for subsidized housing and homeless services in the city and county of Los Angeles is the most significant obstacle to ending homelessness. It is the official position of the West Side Coalition that the City of Los Angeles, County of Los Angeles, or both should place an initiative on the November ballot that creates a dedicated revenue stream to build the housing and provide the services we need to effectively end homelessness in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Eva Williams, Steve Renahan, Joseph Corcoran, and Mr. Herman to close.
Hi, good afternoon. Committee Chair, members of the committee. My name is Eva Williams. I'm the director of the Los Angeles office for CSH, the Corporation for Supportive Housing. CSH seeks to improve the health and well-being of our community and transform the lives of the most vulnerable Angelenos by bringing together diverse public and private partners and assisting these partners across sectors and systems to expand and align the resources needed to end homelessness. CSH, along with our community and public sector partners, is working tirelessly to help get us to that place as a whole community wherein significantly fewer people become homeless. And when they do, individuals and families are helped
to quickly reconnect with housing and the systems of support needed to ensure that they don't return to homelessness. On behalf of CSH and our partners, I want to thank the committee members for your bold and decisive leadership in putting forward this motion to dramatically expand the supportive housing pipeline. This will effectively more than triple the number of supportive housing units created on an annual basis from 300 to 1,000. This motion is absolutely critical if we're to make even a dent in resolving the magnitude of the homeless
Thank you.
problem facing.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Steve Renahan. I'm with Shelter Partnership. The Homeless Strategic Report includes many, many strategies that any jurisdiction that's serious about ending homelessness would be wise to adopt. But where we live, with our shortage of affordable housing, ever-increasing high rents, and decreasing vacancy rates, by far the most important strategy in the plan is the production of large numbers of permanent supportive housing units. So this motion, dealing with planning to make that production process as efficient and swift as possible, is exactly the right thing to be doing at this time. So we commend the makers of the motion and urge unanimous adoption. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Joseph Corcoran, SRO Housing Corporation. As you can see, you have many nonprofit developers in the room. We're the experts at producing permanent supportive housing. To officially prioritize permanent supportive housing and incentivize and streamline the process to obtaining planning and building approvals is critical for us to increase the production and do it in less time. So we fully support this measure, and we really appreciate this motion coming before us because it's a long time coming. We've been doing this for a long time. We're not doing it fast enough. We can solve the homelessness problem with your help, and this is just one piece of the process that will help us do that. Thank you.
Well, the fact of the matter is, developers fucked up the system that we had that was to protect our rights living in homes. Instead, you created the gentrification to remove us from our own neighborhoods by rezoning. Assholes like Paul Krikorian, who's on recall, that fool, and other budgetary people involved with the revitalize of Los Angeles, creating housing discrimination. And I'm bringing this out for the record. Independent Living Center of Southern California versus the City of Los Angeles under litigation against the City of Los Angeles regarding the concerns of the American Disability Act for fraudulently using state and local federal dollars to build your development and take from the public, you bunch of fucking thieves. And I got 10 seconds, and I'm going to say it just the way it sounds. Stop stealing from the public.
You're
Obama,
off the topic.
do something about this issue. Make us live in our own independent homes. We have the ability.
Off topic and time's up. So we have a report from our planning department on this matter.
Afternoon, council members. Matt Glesney with the Department of City Planning. I work in our policy shop, mostly on housing issues. We're extremely pleased to see this motion and to be working on it to advance the very important cause of permanent sort of housing and to look at everything we can do to advance it within the city of Los Angeles. We know money is a huge part of it, but we also want to make sure we're doing everything we can on the planning and land use side to facilitate these very important projects. We know permanent sort of housing is a unique housing typology that mixes services with housing that's geared mostly towards the formerly homeless. It does get treated like every other multifamily building. That's according to state law that was actually put forward by Councilmember Cedillo when he was in Sacramento, SB2. It says you have to treat it like everything else in the city, every other multifamily city, but we know permanent sort of housing is a unique typology with unique needs, unique set of characteristics. We think we want to work with all the people in this room to identify the particular issues for this housing type and to see how our development standards can best address it. There are things like parking, things like density that we think we could be looking at that make this product different than a normal multifamily property. We are very interested in the idea of a kind of program EIR that's laid out in the motion. CEQA is a complicated issue, but we are really excited to look and see what we can do with this. They sort of look at an overall program around permanent supportive housing to lay out some standards and see if projects then coming after that will be able to fit within sort of the parameters of that program EIR and therefore be able to be streamlined and take sort of advantage of that, the master EIR for this program. There are funding issues and timing issues with that, but we are very excited to see that in the motion and to see that as part of our work program. This is something, we have a housing unit now within the City of Los Angeles Planning Department, thanks to the council leadership. That staff's coming online in about a month's time, and we look forward to get started as soon as that staff's in the room and working with our city partners at HCID and LASA, as well as all the providers in this room to really define this program and to move it forward. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that. Yeah.
Excellent. Members? Mr. Price, Mr. Bonin, Mr. Rizar.
Thank you. The housing unit in the planning department is just being developed, and you're in the process of creating that. You're giving your workload and everything else. Would this be able to be, and you're working with HCID on this, correct? It's a joint HCID planning department?
Absolutely.
Report, right? So the housing department, the planning department, you are fully stacked and able to work on this and everything else that quickly fell on your lap?
We do already have quite a full work program with the housing unit. Of course, there's a lot of things we need to do on housing, as you all know. So we do have quite a lot of a work program. We've been working with council offices on that program, what that looks like. We do think this is at the top of the list, one of the highest priorities of that unit. We have tentatively the idea of sort of one person dedicated to homeless issues, looking top to bottom from shelters, transitional housing, permanent sort of housing. So this would fall within that role.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Well, one thing I'm interested in seeing is as we move towards a program EIR, I'm interested in seeing what the public input requirements are for that, because as we hopefully move towards a model of decentralization of services from the historic areas that we've concentrated homeless services to one of decentralization. What's critical to this is that the public supports these projects coming into communities, and if we are limiting public input, it might have a backlash as opposed to a supportive environment where we could continue on our model and support our decentralization model. So I'm very interested in seeing what the report back on that will be. And secondly, we want to have a clear understanding on the trade-offs. I fully support this, and I think permanent supportive housing should be in the front of the line, given that over a third of our homeless individuals, number one, need housing first, but also have mental health issues, and they could receive those services at their housing units. This is critical. But at the same time, we want to see, we should see very clearly what the trade-offs are if we're putting one type of project in the front of the line versus others, and what those others are, so that we could, very clearly see what those trade-offs are.
We'll make sure the report back covers those items. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Bonin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. First of all, Matt, thank you for your work on this. I know from my staff that you're working on several important things all at the same time, so I appreciate the work you and the planning department are doing on this. Can you talk me through a little bit about how the program level EIR works and how that would impact consideration of a specific project?
Sure, I'll do my best. Like I said, CEQA it's not my expertise, and it's a complicated subject matter, but a program EIR is generally used when a city or jurisdiction kind of wants to carry out a new regulatory program, something like this, where you're creating a new ordinance, creating a new typology, a new set of regulations. The idea is within a program EIR, you can look at all the impacts that might result from a defined program. Sometimes you set an actual numerical limit to, we're going to look at 1,000 units or X amount of units per year or per this, in these general locations, and you're able to sort of figure out on a macro basis what those impacts might be for projects and coming down the line. What it allows you to do then is when projects come in later, you would compare the project to what was analyzed in the program EIR to see if it fits within what was analyzed and within those impacts that were already analyzed. Essentially, you don't have to analyze the same impacts twice. Through a program EIR, you would see what all the impacts might be, and you would develop a program, a mitigation program, to alleviate or mitigate those impacts, and then projects would have to just sort of do some of those mitigations, but they may not be subject to the lengthy whole process to establish that all over again. You've already done the analysis. It's just now there may be some mitigations you have to do.
Do we have any sense, or is it too premature at this point to know how much that would shorten the timeline for consideration of a permanent supportive housing project?
It depends on the project, what their environmental review is, but like you heard, there's projects taking a year, 2.5 years. A large part of that is CEQA. Many times, even with an MND, which is below the higher level EIR, just the workload right now to get to those, these are all taking a long time. Right. They're taking from, an MND may take 6 to 9 months. EIRs are taking 1.5 years, possibly 2 years. And so if you're able to avoid those because you've already analyzed and get them, again, they wouldn't be off scot-free. They would still have to do some mitigations. You'd still have to analyze the individual project, but you wouldn't have to go through that lengthy review process.
And we've done program-level EIRs for other things, like the mobility plan and stuff like that, right?
It's typically when we do adopt a large plan like that. Yeah. Right. This is somewhat unique in the scope of a particular housing typology. But there are precedents of other cities doing similar things. Yeah.
Great. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. I wanted to follow up on a question that Mr. Weezer put forward. We appreciate the thorough nature of your report and the enthusiasm with which you all approached this work. I think it's absolutely what's needed in order to move the ball on it. But I wanted to hear more about your sense of the readiness of your department to actually make this undertaking. And again, I know it's priority, so I get that, but how ready or sort of not ready do you all think you are? What's the sort of distance between here and there?
I'm happy to step in on that. I'm Ken Bernstein, Principal City Planner with the Department of City Planning. Did want to, again, thank the council that we do have a housing unit, as Mr. Glesney mentioned. In about a month, we'll have staffing, 2 additional staff positions in our housing policy unit, as well as 2 additional positions to help move forward in an expedited fashion priority housing projects, particularly 100% affordable projects, and move those through the system. As has been indicated, we have a large number of housing motions. I think there have been more than 20 motions addressing affordable housing and homelessness that have been put forward by the council. And so obviously we do need to prioritize those motions. However, this set of issues around homelessness, as Mr. Glesney mentioned, is certainly at the very top of the list. Otherwise, we are looking for opportunities to combine many of the motions that have been introduced, address those with some common tools, such as a look at our density bonus ordinance and other ordinances where we can address multiple policy goals that have been articulated by the council. So we're not coming back with perhaps 20 separate policy initiatives for you, but have a more streamlined set of proposals and ordinances we can bring to the council. So we're ready to take this on, and we'll be looking to, again, work closely with HCID, our city attorneys, and outside partners to try to come up with a sensible approach to these issues.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Mr. Price?
Timing is for getting back to the committee on those?
I think we can do an initial report back in 60 days on this.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions for planning members? Hearing none, we'll also get a report from HCID on this. Thank you all so much.
Good afternoon. I'm Helmi Hisurik with Housing and Community Investment Department, and I do want to reiterate that HCID and the Department of City Planning are working together already and have the full intention of working together collaboratively on this effort. The report that I'd like to give really has 2 sections. The first is briefly what we've done to put the permanent supportive housing development program in place, and then what it would take to make it scalable. We've done a number of things within the department to prepare the department to scale up for rapid development of permanent supportive housing across the city. First of all, about 10 years ago, we established 2 land acquisition funds. They've been very successful over the course of the last 10 years. The Supportive Housing Loan Fund, which we've partnered with Corporation for Supportive Housing on, for example, has deployed over $65 million and has funded 36 projects and generating over 1,600 units of permanent supportive housing across the city. That, as well as the New Generation Fund, have been very, very important parts of the development program. We've created a transparent and predictable pipeline of permanent supportive housing. We have a 2-year queue of development projects now that we work on. We have permanent supportive housing projects scattered all over the city, not concentrated in one community or council district. We've aligned our funding programs with the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Department of Mental Health, and the Department of Health with respect to putting vouchers and services in the permanent supportive housing. We have linked our funding to coordinated entry systems so that the permanent supportive housing that's being funded by the city is housing the most vulnerable homeless populations. We have changed our loan agreements so that the supportive housing projects can use more funds for on-site services rather than pay the city back through residual receipts. So we've taken a number of steps to actively promote and improve the quality of permanent supportive housing. But due to a variety of constraints, we have the maximum we've been able to produce is 300 per year, and that's, we pushed that goal up every year for the last couple of years. And so we're talking now about how do we get to 1,000. I mean, that's our goal, and that is reflected in this motion. In order to do that, we believe we need to expand both the New Generation Fund and the Supportive Housing Loan Fund. And the expansion of those pre-development funds also has to be accompanied by permanent sources of financing. It doesn't help to put a lot of projects in pre-development if you don't have the sources of funding to complete them. We want to create an accelerated pipeline using the 4% low-income housing tax credit system, which is, as noted in the motion, underutilized and doesn't have the competitive constraints of our typical 9% system. In order to do that, we will need to increase our bond staff, our bond program staff. We have a budget request in this year, in fact, to increase the bond staff, and that is absolutely needed in order for us to expand that activity. We strongly encourage the finding of additional resources for permanent supportive housing, and we know that there's an effort underway to identify resources. We think it needs to be over $1 billion for permanent housing, permanent supportive housing. We need to continue to adopt some non-financial strategies. Under ED 13, we recently adopted strategies to reduce the time to write covenants and implement them. We are continuing to work with the Department of City Planning on streamlining CEQA as well as site plan review. We think a program EIR could work very, very effectively with a development program. So for example, if we put 15 projects a year, permanent supportive housing projects a year into the city system, and that program that puts that in place has an EIR, is looking at the environmental impacts of all those projects, that could move those much more quickly. We want to continue to strengthen our partnership with HACLA and with LASA and with the LA County for service funding. That is central to the development program, is a strong partnership of agencies. And then lastly, we have recently put land on the street, or we're about to put land on the street that is we inherited from the redevelopment agency for development, much of which is going to preference permanent supportive housing. And to the extent we can continue to find public land to make available as part of this program, we think that will also add to accelerating the pipeline for permanent supportive housing. So we can scale, we're ready to scale. The system is in place, but for the funding.
Thank you so much, very important. Questions, members? Thank you.
Great.
Very thorough. So it sounds like we'll hear back from planning sometime around late summer, and this thing will be cooked a little more, so we'll continue this item until that time.
Sir, the item will be continued in committee.
Thank you. Is there any more business before us?
The desk is clear, sir.
Thank you so much. Hearing nothing else for the good of the order, this meeting is adjourned.